Balancing life and death. That's where we live, isn't it? In between our own birth and death, in between the myriad births and deaths of those whom we love, balancing life and death. It's where we're called to live. And where we're called to live in faith. Just this week I was having a conversation with another woman about the death of a common friend. And right in the midst of the conversation, she took out her wallet and showed me pictures of her 3-day-old granddaughter. Almost as if to name that mystery of human being, that we live in the midst of life and death, and we balance our existence precariously between the two, the gift of life, the sorrow of death. It's part of being human. And it was part of being human for Jesus too. One of the great gifts of God to us was that Jesus was fully human. Born into this world in a human body, birthed in a human way, growing up and shaped by a myriad of human experiences, navigating an adult life with its complexities. Jesus was as human as you and I are, and what a great gift from God. In the passage before us today on this 5th Sunday of Lent, as we come ever closer to Jesus' ascent to Jerusalem and the events of Holy Week that await us there, on this passage today in the Gospel of John, we are given a sign, a glimpse of things to come, certainly, but also of the ways a human Jesus dealt with a human grief. When the passage opens in the 11th chapter of John, we find that Jesus had missed the funeral. He had come too late. By the time he arrived at the home of his friends Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and dear friends they were, the rituals of public mourning had been completed. The meals, the observances, the burial itself were over. He had missed the funeral. But he hadn't missed the grief. His own or theirs. The gospel writer tells us in great detail about the depth of Jesus' own emotions. We are told by the gospel writer of John that Jesus was deeply troubled, for he had loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and his soul was grieved. He had missed the funeral, but he hadn't missed the grief, his own and others, and he was there for the questions. Why? Why were you late, Jesus? Where were you? What took you so long? If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. Why did you let this happen? Why did he have to die? If you cared about us, Jesus, if you loved us, if you really were the Son of God, you could have prevented this. Where were you in the midst of it all? The questions that come in the face of grief. And the questions that continue long after the burial. The questions that haunt us, that keep us up at night, always they are why questions, how questions, questions we ask without any answers. I have a black and white photograph in my office that was given to me by a parishioner a long time ago. The photograph is of a forest of trees beside a road, and there's a hand-painted sign, a hand-lettered sign, nailed on one of the trees beside the road, and it says in scrawled human printing, simply and starkly, "Why, Jesus, why?" I don't know what that sign marks. I don't know if someone died in that spot, maybe an automobile accident or a motorcycle accident or some tragic accident at the side of a road. I don't know why someone hung that sign. But I know the depth of that question. question. And I've asked it before, and I'm sure you have asked it too, about many personal griefs and about all of the griefs in the world as people suffer in unimaginable ways. Why, Jesus? Why? And Jesus lets Mary's questions hang in the air, trapped in the thick fog of her grief. And then Scripture tells us Jesus himself weeps, sharing their human emotions and perhaps asking himself the same questions. Jesus weeps. There is power in this text. Power in the presence of Jesus at the scene of suffering. Power in Jesus' tears mixed with their own. And power in the fact that Jesus doesn't meet their questions with an easy answer. He listens, and he grieves with them. And I think Jesus grieved as one who knew the loss of his dear friend Lazarus. And I think Jesus grieved as one who saw his friends Mary and Martha so brokenhearted. And I think Jesus grieved as one who knew that death, first here in Lazarus and soon his own, that death would be the greatest force he would confront. Death, so real, so final. And I think Jesus grieved because grieving is part of being human. I very recently had a conversation with a colleague who had attended a funeral in Zambia. The rituals of mourning there were much different than here. They were elaborate and demonstrative, with much weeping and wailing, commensurate with the emotional distress felt at the death of one too young to die. My colleagues were moved by the outward expressions of grief that accompanied the family for weeks, long past the funeral itself. Here, closer to home, psychologists have observed that we in North America tend to be a mourning-avoiding culture. We tend to practice a more personal grief, a kind of lonely stoicism in which we brace ourselves for the funeral, perhaps, and then dry our tears and get back to work or life as we knew it, to try to return to normal or keep busy, even as the grocery store clerk smiles at us and wishes us a nice day. Most of us are reticent to show our grief outwardly or to seek or accept help in times of great sorrow. Instead, we often try to make some sense of it on our own. And when we do so, our grief can be isolating. Instead of a time of connecting us to the very community that can help us heal, grief unshared becomes isolating. But grief shared can connect us to the very community that can help us heal. And so it was in our gospel lesson this morning that the sharing of grief between Mary and Martha and Jesus became the beginning of a healing. As they confided their anger and their frustration and their deep distress in Jesus. And as he shared in their loss, and together they began the process of healing. A process deeply rooted in faith. Grief is part of being human, but faith is our Christian response. Our Christian response to that which breaks our hearts. Our Christian response to that which tears us up. Our Christian response to that which hurts in our lives and in others' lives. Faith How is it that grief turns to faith? The sisters Mary and Martha in our text give us an amazing clue. It says, "One, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know," she says, "even now I know God will give you whatever you ask." She's speaking to Jesus. "Even now," she says, "I will trust you. Even now that everything is all messed up, even now that the miracle I asked for didn't happen, even now that the doctors have done all they can, even now that my brother has died and I can't believe all this has really happened to me, even now, I will trust you." Faith is the ability to say exactly that, to say those words. Even now, God, I trust you. Even now that my life is confusing, or things are not turning out the way I hoped, or I did not get the job I wanted or needed, or make the team, or even now that my family has not turned out the way I had hoped it would, even now that life is complicated beyond what I'd ever imagined, even now that I am getting older and have new limitations or less energy, even now that I have lost the one I love, even now that I am approaching death myself, even now when I am not sure what comes next, even now, perhaps especially now, I trust you, Jesus. For you, Jesus, are the one who knows too well the suffering and pain of the world. You, Jesus, are the one who weeps with us. You, Jesus, are the one who will not let suffering and death have the final word. You, Jesus, are the one who commands Lazarus to come out to new life and who invites us to come out to new life in your name. Even now, Jesus, will I trust you. Lord, you are the resurrection and the life. And in our gospel story today, Jesus did the miraculous. He raised Lazarus from the dead. "Lazarus, come out," he said. And to the community gathered nearby, unbind him and let him go. A foreshadowing of events that were yet to come, of Jesus' own death that awaited him in Jerusalem, of God's own power of resurrection that would be made gloriously manifest on that Easter Sunday. Jesus did the miraculous and promises the same to us, to not let death have the final word, to call us forth always to new life, to link us to the very community that can unbind us and let us go, to give us those who can journey with us in our grief to new places of faith and hope. Even now, let us trust him, especially now, with whatever place of uncertainty or grief or call or confusion is yours. Even now, let us trust Jesus as he leads us to new life. So be it, and may it be so. Amen.